Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Something Comes Along podcast, where we talk about how people's life circumstances change, challenges are thrown at them, and how they cope and navigate with those changes. Challenges can affect the young and old, male and female, but for this episode, we are focusing on the male of the species, of which I am one. Now, before I introduce my guests, just a few facts by way of introduction. So, the male suicide rate is 3 times that of the female suicide rate. If you are 50 years old and a man and younger, suicide is the most likely killer of that age bracket. It's a common perception, or it's a truth, I'll ask the guys later, that men are rubbish at sharing their feelings and talking about their mental health. My two guests today are more than playing their part in trying to create these environments where men can talk. So let me introduce them. I'm joined by Chris McMinn. Chris is the Midlands Area Lead for Andy's Man Club, which is an organisation that I have got to know and love over the last year when I myself have gone along to a couple of the different meeting points. There are hundreds up and down the country every Monday night. Chris started as a volunteer and invested a lot of his time into the club, a bit of a local hero, in my opinion. And as I say, he's now in a position of responsibility, aren't you, Chris? And you are the lead of the Midlands area.
So it seems. Thank you very much for having me on, Gary. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'll actually correct you. I started out as a service user 3 years ago when we were in Duddington, which is a club that then splits to become Corby and Stamford. My journey took me to Corby, and before we started the first group in Leicestershire. And yes, I in the last 7 weeks ago found myself working for the charity.
Good for you. And not a member of Andy's Man Club, but to confuse everybody, called Andy. I'm joined by Andy Syms, who you can probably see from his bio is the founder of the Vanishing Man. Now, Andy is someone who I've known for a lot longer. Through our professional lives, which have intertwined over the years. But in recent times, and our recent contact is because Andy has been brave enough and open enough to talk about his own journey and create this vehicle, the Vanishing Man, to talk about how guys need to reconnect and talk if they lose their own purpose to do with their professional lives or their gender lives changing. So, welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Gary. Apologies advance, everybody, for my slightly croaky voice. I've been doing a couple of rounds with COVID in the last couple of weeks, but absolutely delighted to be here. It's such a worthwhile cause. And yeah, thanks for having me on, and Chris as well.
Brilliant. Now, I'm going to come back to you about your own individual organisations in a minute and why you got involved. Chris, going back to my intro, is it that men, people like us, are hardwired? And it is, scientifically harder for us to talk and open up, or is it a historical, societal thing where it's never been encouraged?
I'm absolutely the wrong person to talk about science, whether we're scientifically hardwired. I couldn't say, but the proof is in the pudding. With the horrific stat that you mentioned, it's actually now the biggest killer. Suicide is now the biggest killer of men under 54. From my experience, certainly in terms of awareness with the charity, engagement with our social media campaigns, it's mainly women reaching out on behalf of men. There is a real reticence on the part of men to speak and to open up. I go out, I talk to businesses, I do presentations for the charity. And again, a lot of the engagement is from the female aspects of the room. It's tough getting men to open up. Absolutely.
Andy?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The majority of our work at the Vanishing Man project essentially starts in the corporate world. So a lot of the guys that we are interacting with, we're talking to, we're trying to attract the attention of, are also sometimes very reticent to talk because they've got a degree of leadership and seniority, which sometimes makes it even more difficult to say, look, I'm I'm struggling. I'm kind of lost. I'm not quite sure where I am because it looks like the admission of failure, and it's certainly not something that most guys would walk down the corridor, knock on the door of HR, and say, "Look, I think I've got a problem." They would rather, just keep completely quiet about the whole thing, and sort of suffer in silence. And those are the guys that we want to attract, but it's very difficult, for the reasons that Chris has said as well. But when you overlay that kind of corporate layer of leadership and responsibility, potential weakness, particularly in markets where, if I say something, will I get moved on? Where the markets are tough, they're a bit tight. Am I making myself a target? I should probably just therefore keep quiet.
And is it my imagination, or is the world getting slightly less macho in that it is now more acceptable because people are talking about it and it's getting slightly better?
Very briefly, let me try and answer that one. I think there's two answers to that. I think there is a trend towards masculinity, to trying to understand, what a man is, what a real man is. And I've come across a number of, really good coaches and others who are sort of helping men to understand, what a man should be. But for me, that's a very, very nebulous topic. The more important topic, I think, is who should you be? Who are you authentically? And are you living according to your own values, to your own purpose, without some stereotype of, if I'm a man, I should act in this way, I should go to the gym, I should look a particular way. I think there's a slight concern in my mind, and I'd be fascinated to see what Chris says about this, that being a man, acting as a man, as a parent, as a partner, as a professional, can be slightly confused from, what's the traditional role of a man.
There is a stereotype of what a masculine man should be. It's not manly to show any kind of weakness. There's a stigma surrounding showing to showing any kind of weakness. Not wanting to be a burden, perhaps feeling like you are having to provide as this traditional masculine figure. But men come in all shapes and sizes. I see that on a weekly basis. I can cast my eyes around a room and I can see people from all different walks of life, with all different circumstances. Not every man is a father. Not every man is a professional. Every single man is individual, and these stereotypes that are forced on us are not helpful. They're actually damaging, because a lot of people can't necessarily live up to those in their eyes. They shouldn't have to feel that way. We are all individuals.
And Chris, when you, either as an initial kind of user, or as you became to run some of the clubs at Andy's Man Club, I mean, did it surprise you how quickly guys were prepared to open up if they were kind of put in the right environment?
It depends on the individual, and you will find that some people take a whole lot longer than others. But then I've sat there in a room with your typical 6'5" rugby player, and they've opened up almost immediately, and they've more than comfortable showing that vulnerability. And then somebody that you would perhaps expect wouldn't, it takes a whole lot longer. So it really does depend on the individual.
Andy, what have you seen? Any trends out there?
Yeah, yes. Let me just kind of go back and slightly caveat one of my previous comments. In saying that men in professional life are sometimes unwilling, I don't mean by that the organization is unwilling to hear them. I think organizations increasingly are, to your previous question, understanding a bit more about duty of care, although it doesn't particularly mean the same thing as it would in say a health environment or a medical environment. But what I've also found, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience here as well, is that these things often are not just fixed inside 2 minutes. So getting guys to open up is really very much the first step to, okay, what do we do with this? As a business guy, my expectation when I first went to see a counsellor, and I kind of picked the first one off Google, counsellors in Cardiff, they'll do. What I was expecting was, okay, what's our critical path? What's our end game? How do we know when we're getting on? What homework do you want me to do? Please keep summarizing. All the things that I would have done in business to create an outcome actually don't necessarily apply to this sense of I'm losing my relevance, I'm losing my identity, kind of losing that. I just feel like I'm drifting away. It's not a wham. It may be in some cases, but often it isn't. It's a slow drift. So to get people to open up, I think is one of the most difficult but critical stages. But then I think we have to accept, and I'd be interested in what Chris has to say on this, there is a path, there's a journey that may take many, many months, if not years, to get to that sense of understanding what's going on, reframing your thinking, and then, as we say, kind of recoloring yourself back to being authentic. And because there's pain involved, sometimes people might say, oh, I think this is the problem. They might talk and then retreat. So the trick is to kind of hang on in there, stay with them, keep them open and vulnerable as much as is possible, and see them through that element of pain as it arises, as it inevitably will, because there's no change without pain.
You have a situation where progress is never linear in terms of opening up and talking. So when you're bringing up things that are perhaps difficult and really hard to bring to the surface, then that is going to cause pain, and it often will involve setbacks on the way, along the way. But part of that process is it's changing patterns of thought and patterns of behaviour that perhaps have been ingrained for the entirety of an adult life.
Yes.
And that's never going to happen overnight. And I've seen people, going through the process, and they're still going through that years on, but they're in a much better place for it. And they understand themselves a lot better. So they can start to reframe, but you're never going to get that progress immediately. And we are also dealing with, societal stereotypes that have been ingrained over generations as well. So we're making progress. People make progress, but no progress is ever overnight.
Yeah, agreed.
But coming to you, you don't know these questions are coming, so kind of a personally, I'll come to you first, Chris. I mean, what have you learned about yourself actually by the last few years?
I learned that I wasn't capable of talking. I learned that I thought I was, but actually I wasn't. I've also learned that I wasn't very good at listening. And that was a big one for me. So when I first attended an Andy's Man Club back in 2022, my first thought was, I'm just going there to offload. I'm going there to get my story out, to speak, because I haven't had or felt that I've had the opportunity to do that previously. The most powerful thing for me actually was hearing the stories of other people, other people's circumstances, what they were, the difficulties they were going through in their lives. And I've come to understand just how powerful listening is. It makes you feel like you're realizing that you're not on your own. It makes you realize that there's nothing wrong with you for struggling with certain things, certain aspects of life. And it also gives you a real appreciation of other people. And listening is so important.
Andy, I'll come to you in a minute, but just on example of what you said then, and you may have said this to me, Chris, yourself. Someone shouted at me anyway. I think it might have been yourself. But I remember at a club or talking about a club saying, I was feeling quite positive, and I didn't want to say a couple of good news stories because someone had just said a really bad news story about like their son, and it was my son, and you said, no, for God's sake, it's good to hear positive stories in a group. I mean, it's not a circle, never-ending circle down to the bottom of who can be status today. It's sharing ups and downs with each other to help everyone raise their level.
Absolutely, and you want to give people that bit of hope as well, because if you're just sat around and all you are is surrounded by negativity, and all you're hearing is one awful story after another, then that's going to impact on everybody. You're going to take that away with you. It's going to leave you bereft of hope. One of the main things, and you will be aware yourself, Gary, that the setup of the Andy's Man Club sessions that we run, we have 2 questions at the end, which are usually pretty light-hearted. And the idea is to send people away, not to leave the room having just shared something that's really difficult to talk about, that they may have been internalizing, bottling up for so long, but actually to leave people going away on a lighter note, to have had a laugh. And there is absolutely no shame in turning up and saying, well, actually, I've had a good week. Hopefully that might impact on the person sat next to him who's in a dark place.
Yeah.
And they might think, well, maybe that could be me.
Yeah. Thank you. And Andy, what about yourself? What have the journey's an overused word, is, came from the X Factor, doesn't it? But, yourself, what have you learned about yourself?
Well, the Vanishing Man kind of is me, Gary. The project started because I had what some people might call executive burnout, which is a very overused term. I don't quite know what that necessarily means. But in my case, it was a complete loss of confidence from somebody who was very confident. He would throw himself into things, would take on jobs that were possibly bigger, was always up for the adventure, was always wanted to see what was over the next hill. All of a sudden, after quite an extreme set of circumstances where I was living overseas, I lost it. I just lost my own confidence. Now, there wasn't really at that point anybody that I knew who to turn to. And so in terms of learning about myself, I had to kind of do it as I was going along. And the project kind of came out of that sense of, okay, I'm trying to figure out what's actually happening. Why is it happening? How am I acting and reacting? What's this got to do with me and others? How do I make sense of this? And then I got to a point of saying, okay, look, there are certain things that I need to do in my own head to kind of reframe my existence that is actually at the moment quite dark and quite painful and quite difficult. And I felt very, very alone kind of going through that process, despite the fact I have many wonderful children and wives. But there was this disconnect. I was kind of on my own. So one of the things that I think is absolutely critical, and I think Chris may have just touched on this, is this sense of accountability. You have to accept that actually there is something wrong. For a long time, I thought, oh, the phone's going to ring, the cavalry's going to come over the hill, somebody will come and save me, Gary Jones will call me with a nice plum job, and the world will be all sorted. And it didn't happen. And month after month after month went by. And then I had to say, wait a minute, there is something wrong here, which I need to take accountability of. And once I did that, I was then much more able to say, okay, so what have I got to do? What are the key steps to help me reframe who I am and how I work going forward? So I've learned accountability, really important. Don't be defensive. Accept that part of your personality may be that sometimes you've struggled because as you've been feeling more and more anxious, you've been projecting back that sense that then in turn comes back to you in the workplace in terms of, why have I got so many enemies? Well, actually, it's me that's kind of causing it through my anxiety. So lots to learn, but accountability, I think, is crucially important and not to blame others.
One of the main reasons for doing these podcasts, and this one particular, is to continue to raise awareness. It's layer upon layer upon layer, and we'll add in Andy's Man Club and the Vanishing Man. Make sure that people get the links to go to, and it will be sent it out. But if you are a guy or a woman, but we're talking about guys today, listening to this, a couple of questions. The first one is, how do you know when you're struggling? And how do you know?
You know, man. You know. There's an inner voice. There are probably many voices that say you can do better. Yeah, but I don't know what to do. Well, they're really relying on you. Well, if I knew how to fix it, I would fix it. You're probably not sleeping. You've got this inner monologue going. You're feeling increasingly detached from the people around you at home and at work. You're feeling increasingly untethered. It's more like a kind of a boat that's drifting away from the jetty. And you know that there's something wrong. The question is, how bad does it have to get? How hot does the burning platform have to be before you say, I'm going to do something about it? Or, God forbid, you say, I can't take this anymore. And then you go and do something drastic. But Gary, man,
It's difficult because some people are aware but then they choose not to act on those thoughts.
Correct. Yeah.
That
Denial.
they are aware that they're struggling, but they choose to ignore it and plow on regardless, without seeking that help, without seeking any support. And I have come across a number of people that have perhaps not had that self-awareness to realize that they're struggling, and it has taken somebody else in their life to point out that your behavior is different, your relationships are struggling, and they've not been able to see that. So it's a lot of us are aware. I was certainly aware myself, like Andy, fully aware of the fact that I was losing my sense of self. But you do come across those that it takes a third party interjection.
And friends and family. I mean, people have said to me that, what do I do? Because I know something's not right with person X, but, I've tried to say, are you okay? And they say yes. And what's your advice to people who are looking at someone and going, I can't work out how to unlock them or make them this, and I can't get to them. What do you do?
You keep trying, you keep reaching out. I mean, there does come a point where, you might feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, but if you have concerns over somebody, I always say, and I think I've said to you, Gary, you ask somebody how they are, and the stock answer, the default answer, it's almost a rhetorical question that we ask each other every day. But I would always say to ask somebody again, no, actually, how are you? And you might find that you get a very different answer if you persevere.
Yeah, I've walked past a couple of guys in London earlier the day, and I think they worked together because they kind of, and one of them said, "Are you okay?" And he went, "Yes." "Are you okay?" And he went, "Yes." And then they both stopped talking. They had nothing else to say. It was a closed question followed by a closed question followed by silence, and then they went to their separate ways. I thought, well, God, that's a typical conversation between two blokes, isn't it? How depressing. Andy,
I
sorry.
think, well, I was going to say, I think there's something in who's asking the question and why are they asking. I've come across situations with professional guys where their struggles, which they've been struggling with at work, have become increasingly difficult. The stress and the anxiety has been building, and the wife and the family have absolutely gathered round and been there, supported them, been totally, for them. I've come across other examples where it's totally alienated them from their wives, from their families, who just don't know what to do. I think there's something about how you ask the question and why you ask the question. If you're asking the question because you're a bit irritated by this person, because they're just not the same person that they were, then, that's very different from somebody who's genuinely interested in or curious or passionate about, look, there is definitely something wrong here and we need to face it together in some way. So being part of the issue is feeling alienated, and by people keep asking you, "Are you all right? You're all right? What's going on? Are you okay? Why don't you talk about it?" It just makes it worse, particularly if it's people at work, or a boss. I've had bosses say to me, "Are you sure you're okay?" The last thing you're going to say is, "You know what? I'm a complete basket case. Yeah, I'm absolutely fine. Yeah, so everything's good. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. It's a project. I'm working too hard," that kind of stuff. So I think if you're going to ask the question, ask it with genuine intent, and don't be fobbed off by the person that does what your two guys do and say, "Yeah, I'm all right."
Absolutely agree with that.
One great story I heard at the Northampton Andy's Man Club was a guy who he did shift work at his business. He went along Andy's Man Club. It really helped him. He went back to work. He'd been offside of work for a few weeks. He went back. He was a much better person. And the business, when he was on his evening shift, said, they wanted to carry on going on Monday nights, but they carried on paying him for those hours, so he didn't miss out or didn't stop going because he was scared of losing the money. And that was a beacon of positivity around, businesses recognizing the benefit, and it's nice to hear those stories.
Gary, I would say there's a real power in sort of self-questioning as well. Sometimes we don't ask ourselves difficult questions because we don't necessarily want to hear the answer. But one of the steps towards sort of reframing the way that you think about yourself is to ask yourself about purpose. And I remember having this absolute moment of clarity where I thought, what is my purpose? I kind of knew what it was when I was younger because I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was, kids were growing up. I had a wife or two that, was not at the same time that I was kind of working through, but got to sort of 55, 56. What's my role now? Interestingly enough, I asked my good friend Siri here and said, hey, how do I find a sense of purpose? Because there's nobody else to ask. And Siri said, would you like me to contact a medical professional for you? And I said, no, thank you. But it was a real interesting question about kind of what is my purpose? What am I for? And I think what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to turn people back into, highly productive, very, sort of smart leaders or people that can, really achieve amazing things. We are trying to connect people with the authenticity of who they are, because it's often then this denial of how I'm wired and how I'm being forced to act that is causing me this stress and this anxiety. So to ask myself, who am I really? What's my purpose? What are my values? What do I believe about myself that is holding me back? Are really important questions that you need to ask of yourself.
And we see this, with people who retire from jobs and suddenly lose their identity, and people stop emailing, calling them, and that they kind of wanted peace and quiet for a few years to extend their career, but then all of a sudden they get total silence.
I don't like it.
And end up having to talk to me at 8 o'clock at Pret twice a week.
Nightmare.
I love your LinkedIn updates, Gary.
So it was just going to one final question, really. I mean, if your advice to people watching this, who are going, do you know what, this is me a little bit. I've lost my purpose. I'm lonely. I don't know where to start, really. What would your advice be to them?
My advice is that you aren't alone. You might feel like you're alone, and your circumstances have led to that feeling, but that can be changed. Anything can be changed, and it starts by talking, by reaching out to somebody. If you put yourself in a position of isolation, and I know this is sometimes easier said than done, but there is a way out. There is always somebody out there that will want to help and will want to listen, and it's just a case that if you've pushed everybody away, try and reach back out to them.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Chris has said. The speak up is absolutely critically important. But the other thing I would say is, don't fool yourself that this is just going to miraculously get better. It's not. And if anything, it's going to get worse. The only way to fix it is for you to own up, put your hand up, talk to somebody. And Andy's Man's Club, I'm sure, is the same as the Vanishing Man Project. We are just a little bit further up the road from where you are. We were there not that long ago. And it's really important that you understand that, there's not some sort of clever fix with some clever psychologists or whatever it is. I mean, I'm sure there is. But what you need is people who will just listen to you because they've been there and they get it. And there are hundreds and thousands of guys out there who are only in exactly the same position. Until you do something, then you'll be stuck. You'll keep drifting.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you both for joining on this episode, and thank you both for what you do. The lot of time and effort and thankless stuff that you both do to raise awareness. It's really important stuff.
Don't leave yourself out here, Gary. You do.
Yeah, well done, Gary. You're doing a great job, mate.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching this episode of Something Comes Along, which is a Totem Partners production. We'll see you next time.